face encounter with Greys. Among the most credible was the incident reported by 4 college friends after a harrowing trip in the summer of 1976. Betty and Barney Hill's abduction experience in September 1961 was the first such case reported in the United States. But in the following decades, accounts of alien abduction became increasingly common. Few stories were as sensational as the experience reported by 4 friends who took what was supposed to be an ordinary camping trip. To those who catalog such reports, this UFO encounter is known as the Allagash incident. In the summer of 1976, art students Charlie Fultz, Chuck Rack, and twins Jack and Jim Weiner traveled north from Boston into the wilderness of Maine. For nearly a week, the trip was everything they hoped it would be, a carefree escape from city life. On the 5th day, they camped near Smith Pond, an isolated, stump-filled swamp. It was a perfect spot for night fishing. It was also the place where their lives would change forever.
There was no moon that night. It was real dark, and we didn't want to get lost. So we said, well, the thing to do is make a big fire so we can see it, and then we know which way to paddle when we want to get back to camp later.
And it was quite large, but we cleared around the fire, so there was no problem. And these flames were leaping a good 3 or 4 feet up into the air.
With their makeshift lighthouse aglow, the 4 men left their campsite behind. They paddled several hundred yards out into the pond, headed for a night of fishing they would never forget, and one they would later illustrate in their artwork.
I remember being in the back of the canoe, paddling leisurely. The 2 twins were in the middle. Charlie was in the front. And I remember they were having a conversation, and I was focusing on the night and the lake and the water. And I began to feel observed.
And then all of a sudden, Chuck Rack, who was at the back of the canoe, said, holy mackerel, what the is that? And I turned around and looked, and there was this huge, bright light that was coming out of the trees. It seemed like it was rising out of the trees. At first, we thought, well, it's got to be an airplane or something, right? So we watched it for a few seconds and realized that it wasn't an airplane because it wasn't making any sound at all. It was strange, very strange.
It was a bright, luminous yellow-white, and changing from that color in a very fluid, liquid kind of a way. And we were very, very fascinated. I was in a state of extreme euphoria. I remember just feeling, wow, this is fantastic.
It was just alive. And when it was nearest us, about 100 yards away, it paused. And when it paused, I said to the fellows, I said, I'm going to shine the flashlight and see what it does.
The instant he flashed his flashlight, this thing sent this beam of light out to us. And we were in a 16-foot aluminum Grumman canoe, which in the pitch black of night lit up like a Roman candle. We must have looked like this object just waiting to be approached on this lake.
And all I can tell you is what was going through my mind was just exhilarating expectation. Just, this is fantastic. This is something we can communicate with. It's tempting to communicate with us.
I was completely shocked, and especially shocked that it reacted as quickly as it did, which told us there was some type of intelligence about it. And as soon as this light came out, this thing started moving, and so we thought, well, you know, this is real. This is really happening. This is not a figment of our imagination. I mean, we've got to deal with this situation now. because within a few seconds this thing is going to be right on us.
I wasn't even interested in this thing anymore, other than I didn't want to be as close to it as I was.
I remember paddling as fast as I could, and Jack saying, "It's getting closer, it's getting closer."
And then it was gone. The next thing they remembered, they were back on shore.
And I thought, well, that's it. We've lost our chance. We've let it slip through our fingers. And I observed it leaving and just gradually faded out.
Exhausted, the four men stumbled back to their campsite. There they found the remains of their makeshift lighthouse, the fire that had been built to last for hours, the fire that was now just a pile of charred embers. At the time, no one gave it much thought, though it would later play a large role in their sighting. That night, nothing more was discussed, not the fire, not the unknown object that had chased them only moments before. Sleep was the only thing on their minds. For years, the friends rarely talked about that strange night. Then, in 1978, memories of the sighting began to resurface. Jim Weiner had developed temporal epilepsy after a car accident and suffered periodic seizures. These fits were often triggered by sleep deprivation, and by 1980, Jim was definitely not sleeping well. Vivid nightmares had become a perpetual torment.
All I remember is seeing vague figures, anthropomorphic in shape, but they did not seem human to me. They were around me, and they were either doing things with my genitals, or they were prodding me with some types of instruments. There was an extreme feeling of malevolence. I mean, I was absolutely always felt terrified in this situation.
For a time, Jim kept his nightmares secret. Then he confided in his brother. Jack Weiner's reaction was totally unexpected.
So he starts telling me this, my nightmare, on the phone, and I go, holy mackerel, I've been having the same nightmares. What is going on here?
There was no apparent explanation, but Jim was getting worse, his doctors growing more concerned. Repeatedly, they asked Jim what was wrong, and he finally revealed the nightmares. A psychiatrist working on the case said it sounded like an abduction experience. The doctor suggested that Jim speak to Ray Fowler, a UFO researcher. Jim repeated his story. Fowler took it seriously. Later, the other three also underwent hypnosis. Finally, 4 years after the incident, the details of that terrifying August night would emerge. When four college friends set off for a camping trip in August of 1976, they never dreamed they would end up at the epicenter of one of the most famous cases in UFO history. They all remembered paddling onto a pond and seeing a spectacular light in the sky. Then it came closer, far too close for comfort. The next thing the men recalled was standing on shore. Only later would they suspect that something more sinister had taken place. Regression hypnosis revealed that the four friends had apparently endured a horrific episode known as an alien abduction. It began with the menacing approach of a UFO.
One of the things I remembered very clearly was Jack saying that it's gaining on us. And I remember suddenly being enveloped in this tube of light. And I remembered looking up, and I was thinking about, what the heck is that up there? You know, like, what's up there? And that took a few seconds, and then I looked back again, and Chuck Rack's gone. The last thing I remembered was having both hands on the side of the canoe, looking out at the water to see if Chuck was in the water, and then not seeing him and thinking, oh my God, you know, what happened to Chuck? And then looking up, and then the next thing I remembered was this just intense feeling of almost like I was coming apart or something. That's the only way I can describe it. Then the next thing I remembered was being on my back in this hazy environment, which was just like this nightmare that I'd been having.
All four friends seem to recall a similar traumatic experience.
I'm lying on my back, and I'm disoriented. I'm not sure where I am. As I'm forcing and struggling to get up, a face appears and looks straight down at me.
It reminded me of insects. I remember thinking, my God, these things look like bugs. They had like large eyes, almost like ants have. They could have been goggles for all I know, but and they had some kind of clothing on, like spandex. I became focused on this thing's hand and realizing that it was not a hand like ours at all. And this one had me by the wrist and he was holding my arm up and he had something else in his hand. But I didn't like the looks of it. And I remember thinking, oh boy, here we go. This is it. I got 5 seconds to live. They're going to cut me open. They're going to dissect me, whatever. I just want to get out of here. Get me out of here.
It would take hours under hypnosis before the four men fully detailed the alien examinations. Later, they recalled the peculiar events that brought them back down to Earth.
They moved us again into this other space, this room. Then this area in front of me started changing somehow. It was doing something. It was some type of machine or something. It was very strange. And the last thing I remembered thinking was, here we go. I don't know what's going to happen next, but something is happening.
Under regressive hypnosis, I remember the aliens trying to put me in the canoe. There was one of them standing in the canoe over me, trying to adjust my position in the back of the canoe, and another one was sort of waist deep in the water right next to me. And then they tried to position Jim Wiener in front of me, but he's heavier, and they were having a hard time with him. And then the other two were beamed right on land, and then Jim got out to join them.
As their recollections took shape, the four men learned why their roaring campfire had seemed to burn out so quickly. To those who investigate abduction cases, it's known as missing time. Perhaps as much as 3 hours had passed during the abduction, from the time the men first saw the UFO until the time they found themselves standing on the beach. Meanwhile, their fire had burned down to embers. Hypnosis had restored their recollections of the missing time with unsparing intensity. But now there was no hiding from the memories, no hiding from the trauma of what had apparently happened at Smith Pond.
I mean, every time I had one of these experiences, you know, I would rationalize it as a dream so I could cope with it and say, well, what the heck is really going on here, you know? Is it related to my seizure disorder? Is it, you know, something I'm eating? Do I have a brain tumor? You know, am I working too hard, or am I under a lot of stress? What the heck could possibly cause this kind of repetitive experience?
The Allagash Four are not alone. Their story is remarkably similar to the accounts of thousands of other ordinary people who face the nightmarish certainty that they have been in the hands of aliens. Still, despite all the convincing testimony, the subject of alien abductions is the source of bitter controversy. As sensational as the Allagash incident may seem, it is simply one of the thousands of abduction cases that have been reported. Among UFO researchers, it is regarded as a reliable report with solid eyewitness testimony. Indeed, for those who have examined the case closely, it confirms that at least some people have come face to face with alien creatures.
If you had the amount of evidence for the reality of the Allagash abductions for any other subject, any mundane subject, in a court of law, you could hang a person probably. But because of the bizarre nature of the case, that's not going to happen. People aren't going to accept that evidence, although the evidence is there.
The evidence includes 4 men who were psychologically examined and given polygraph tests before undergoing hypnosis. 4 men who reported remarkably similar accounts of the same event. 4 men who have spent the past several years trying to come to grips with the fact that they were part of something out of their realm of understanding.
I've heard it all, everything. Oh, they must have been on LSD, and people have said, I don't believe a word you say, you're nuts, you're crazy, you belong in a straitjacket. And I say, well, it's part of my life, I can't deny it. And one of the things that's really weird is that you find yourself getting used to the idea that you've been abducted, and that's weird in itself. I mean, how do you get used to something like that?
It has been over 20 years since the alleged encounter. The Allagash incident has been added to the body of reports that argue the abduction phenomenon is real. But this case is not without its own controversy. While 3 of the men are confident the event took place, the 4th is now not so sure.
I'm not denying this happened. I'm just skeptical about the abduction part of the story. To that extent, it wasn't like a visceral reality experience. It wasn't like a true memory. And that's what I had trouble with for years and years and years. Certainly, I shared the experience with the rest of the guys, and they might take that as remembering a real experience, but it's not. The encounter is real. I know that. But regressive hypnosis several years later, I don't know.
The fact that Chuck Rack backed off his abduction story, to me it doesn't have too much significance. Maybe he has since thought about this thing and doesn't want to think it actually happened to him, but nonetheless, his recollections of what occurred back then are consistent with what the others have remembered, either consciously or through hypnosis.
However, researchers like Kevin Randall, who is convinced that UFOs are real, continue to question the Allagash abduction.
They clearly had a UFO sighting. Clearly that event took place. But we've now blurred the boundary between reality and fantasy. We worked for thousands of years so that we understood that dreams were dreams. They were fantasy. They were not necessarily a reflection of reality. And yet in abduction research, if you dream about being abducted, well, that's all accurate information. And we've got to get back and take a solid psychological look at this.
Yet, not all abductions can be written off as dreams. In fact, neither Betty and Barney Hill nor the Allagash Four were even asleep when their abduction was said to have taken place. Among the many controversies surrounding abductions is the use of hypnosis to recall the experience. The technique abduction cases rest on the credibility of the witnesses themselves.
If you trace the history of this, before this subject was even known, Before it was all over television, before people were aware of it, the patterns were already established. So it seems to me there are only two apparent possible explanations for this. Either they really are being abducted, or there is some totally unprecedented, unknown mass hallucination or delusion going on, and that should be of great interest to science too.
Clearly, no one would believe or even take seriously the abduction phenomenon if there was only one person who was telling these tales, regardless of the social pedigree of that person or the prominence of the investigator who investigated that person. We would just say, well, that person's hallucinating, deluded, crazy. So the reason that the abduction phenomenon is a phenomenon is that many people report abductions with conviction, and that they report similar details of the experience. So the question is, where does this consistency of storyline arise from? Even if people were hallucinating, why are the hallucinations the same?
While abduction scenarios are similar from case to case, most have unique details, often overlooked in media coverage of the incident. For example, in the Betty and Barney Hill abduction, it was not generally reported that Barney had dentures. According to Betty Hill's account, dentures were apparently a novelty to the alien abductors.
They come in and they start pulling on Betty's teeth. They were in separate rooms on board the craft. And she's trying to find out what's going on. Well, they don't understand how Barney's teeth come out and hers don't. Now, who would make up a story like that?
The human brain is the most complex object known of in the universe. We know of nothing more complex. And it produces a vast range of conscious states, mind states. So somebody's driving along, and they've been driving at night for hours upon hours upon hours. They go into trance, and the next thing they know, they're being miraculously floated off up into a spaceship. If you look at the idea of floating off to a spaceship, you are looking at perfect description of an out-of-body experience, a lucid dream experience. There's a whole gamut, a whole range of sleep disorders that fit in absolute detail everything that an abductee describes. What we have is a total ignorance of these states of consciousness.
These states of consciousness include not only lucid dreams and out-of-body experiences, but sleep paralysis and near-death experiences as well. All are currently being researched. None are yet fully understood. Perhaps such alternate states of consciousness will prove to be the underlying cause of purported alien encounters. However, in the event such research can't explain away abductions, most people still won't find it any easier to accept that these bizarre events truly occur.
We've been conditioned to believe certain things as regarding what society, what scientists, what theologians tell us exists and what doesn't exist. And when something intrudes into this reality and doesn't fit, it's taboo because people don't want to accept this because it affects their worldview. So this goes across science, theology, you name it. It's very hard to accept things that just don't fit our preconceived notions of what should be and what shouldn't be.
What is the truth about alien abductions? While some believe that the explanation lies in some distant galaxy, at least one scientist is finding answers within the confines of an Earth-bound laboratory. Alien abductions have been reported now for well over 30 years. Many are described in chilling detail by extremely credible eyewitnesses. Yet one fundamental question persists. Are these truly real experiences, or are they somehow imagined? At Laurentian University in Ontario, Canada, neuroscientist Michael Persinger is testing a new theory. Persinger believes that false memories of abductions may actually be created by electrical disturbances within the brain. It has long been known that movements of the Earth's crust can produce bursts of light in the atmosphere. According to Dr. Persinger, these luminous displays release electromagnetic charges that can trigger abduction-like thoughts, just as in his tests. Did Betty and Barney Hill witness such a luminous display? Are abductees like the Allagash 4 victims of a similar flash of energy?
The duration of the events, they're not just brief bursts of things. They're very elaborate, detailed stories. The Hill case, the Allagash case, and hundreds of other cases. They often involve other people. The notion that you've got somehow natural electromagnetic waves affecting two people identically so that their stories match and jibe makes no sense at all.
In the end, abduction cases remain the most troubling of the UFO accounts. They offer little or no physical evidence as proof and rely almost exclusively on personal testimony.
I don't know.
Yet if even one of the thousands of stories is true, it suggests a most unappetizing possibility: that humanity is at the mercy of superior beings that can do with us as they please.